Okay, we're going to get started with Andrea Tarr's session, which is Bootstrap and Joomla UI. And Andy is a member of Joomla's production leadership team with ELT. She's also the co-manager of the Joomla user group New England. You all know her here. She's the author of the book PHP and MySQL 24-Hour Trainer. Product placement. Okay. She is also the Joomla PHP architect for Sears Holdings, and she created the accessible administrator template Hathor, which is included in the Joomla back admin areas, and has been involved in the development of Joomla. She's a former board member of Open Source Matters and is active in the Joomla Bug Squad. So here's Andrea Tarr.
Okay, so the first question is, do you want me to use the mic or not?
Nope.
Good. Hopefully I'm loud enough that it comes over the video, but it's pretty close instead of being way in the back. I almost forgot, I do have my book, PHP and MySQL, and I'm going to be giving away a copy of this at the end of the session. So if you're interested in it, let me know, and we'll just give me your business card or your name, and we'll just draw it up real quickly right at the end of this talk. I'll be doing another one at the end of my talk on less as well. So remind me of that. Okay. So how many people here have ever heard of Bootstrap before today? Okay. And how many of you have actually looked at Bootstrap yet? Okay, a couple. And how many of you have actually put and used Bootstrap in something? All right, we got half a dozen or so.
Not in production.
Not in production, okay. All right, so I'm going to sort of start at the beginning, and let's see, this goes forward and backwards. Haha, that's the way I want to go, okay. And we're going to go over what the problem is, the whole reason why we started to use Bootstrap, and the Joomla UI. And you keep hearing about Bootstrap because that is the major portion, but it is a whole Joomla user experience thing that we're adding in here, which we're adding a couple of additional things to Bootstrap rather than just Bootstrap itself. Then after we go over kind of the problem, we're going to go over actually using Bootstrap, and this is where we'll spend the most of our time on how does it work, what do you do, what does it have in it, and how do you actually call it and use it. And then we're going to show Bootstrap in Joomla. It's like, okay, I understand how to use Bootstrap. Now how do I do it if I actually want to use it in Joomla itself? And I'll go through 3 different options of how you can do that. So, the problem. One of the problems is not everything is in core. And here I'm talking about sort of user experience and buttons and how you present data. So when a third-party extension goes to do something and they are trying to present something that we don't ever use in core, they just make up the UI as to how they should do it. So you've got K1 doing it a certain way, and you've got John Social doing it a certain way, and then you've got Virtumart doing it something else, and they're all trying to present the same kind of thing, but they're all doing it differently. And it's not being done a way that's done in core. So they're adding classes, doing whatever, however they set up their structure. Which means that templates have to be coded for every single third-party extension that starts using some of this other UI. Or what will happen is that the template itself includes all of the CSS, and it looks nothing like the CSS that your template designer or you have designed and what your website looks like, which means that it looks like a patchwork. You go into something and you see a Jom Social site, and it looks like a Jom Social site, whether it's on your website or your website or your website or your website. They all look like the same Jom Social website, but it doesn't look like the rest of your website. So what we wanted to do with Bootstrap is we wanted to get some consistency. We wanted it so that if we go to your website looks like your website, whether it's showing K2 or it's showing Job Social or it's showing Virtuemart or any of these other kinds of extensions. So what Bootstrap does to give us that consistency is it has a set of CSS layout styles. And these layout styles, you know, they're giving certain things as to how you do it, but they're things that you can overlay them, and then that will overlay all of the templates or all of the extensions that are also using Bootstrap. So you can define it once and it will cover everybody. So they have, as well as the layout styles, which is kind of the base structure, they'll also have UI elements. You know, what does this button look like? They also include responsive styles, so that you saw some of the things that Brian was going over earlier, where it takes things from being in 2 and it brings it down below if you're getting narrower, and just some of the different ways that you want to make your site so it responds to the size of whatever the portal is that it's being shown on. And it also has integrated JavaScript. It uses jQuery, and it has, in addition to then having jQuery available to use its things, it has JavaScript within Bootstrap that uses jQuery in order to create different things like you know, the carousels and the slideshows and different UI type of manipulations. It also has a full set of icons, and what this is for is, rather than having to download pictures for a bunch of things, even if they're sort of small pictures, you can have, it has a font that has icons in it. So you can just specify like an entity, a number, and that will use that font character in there to be displayed. So it lets you do some of these, you know, these little tiny, the picture icons that are so popular now, but you're not having to bring down a separate picture for one of those. It also gives you a way that, again, you can unify it. You could also then go and replace all of these with your own set if you wanted to do something like that. Now the other thing that Bootstrap gives us is it's fast and flexible. It has the mimified CSS. If people are not familiar with it, if you look at CSS, it's got all this blank space in it, which you really like to have, and it's got comments. And you really like that if you have to go in and do something, because then you can figure out what's going on. However, you're having to pull that through the bandwidth every single time that it's being called. So what they'll do with with it to mimify it is they'll just strip all of that stuff out, and what you actually put up on your website that gets downloaded each time is a minified version of it. And they do that with JavaScript as well. And then there's one other thing that's kind of quite different from what we've done before with Joomla, and that is that it uses a CSS preprocessor. The one that they've picked and they're using is called Less. And I'm going to be giving a talk later on today on Less and how you use it and everything. You don't need to use Less in order to use Bootstrap. But what it does is it makes it so that if you have some CSS that you have to keep repeating every time, it lets you pull that out, define it once, and then it will go and it will insert that for you in the appropriate places. So if you have a text color that you want to have, and you may want to keep changing that, and then when you change that to change it slightly, I want that slightly darker, you need to go in and find all the different places where that is located, and you have to change it. Or if you have that on your, you say, oh, I want the borders to be the same color as the link color, and so you make it the same, and then you say, oh no, I want to change the border color. Oh, but I don't want to change the link color, so I can't just do a copy replace. Less is something that will let you define that, process it, and then create your actual CSS files that you need. But we'll go over that later. Okay, so that's kind of what the problem is and what Bootstrap brings to it to use it. So I'm going to go on to actually using Bootstrap. So if you want it, we're going to use Bootstrap, and this is just independent of it being in Joomla. What you would do is you would download the CSS and the JavaScript files. I'll go over later where those are. And then you would call these files in your program, plus you would add in jQuery, because Bootstrap does not include jQuery. It uses jQuery, so you do need to make sure that you're calling that. So what you're doing, here's your Bootstrap. It's the minified version, so it's just got the MIN. You can see that's in there, how you know which one it is. And you bring in jQuery. Always make sure you define jQuery before you bring in the Bootstrap JavaScript. So these are just the 3 statements that you would need to put in the header of your index.php file in order to start using Bootstrap. And you could do this with a 2.5 template. You could do this with a 1.5 template. It doesn't really matter. If you're just using, you could use it on a static website as well. If you want to use Bootstrap, that's all you have to make sure that's in there. And notice here, again, that we used CSS files and we used JavaScript files. We didn't use any less files. And less is used to help create Bootstrap, but you don't need it in order to actually use Bootstrap. It is possible to actually use less instead of CSS in the header of your index file, but if you do, then what happens is it's recompiled on the fly, and so there can be a performance hit that way. Kind of nice when you're doing development, perhaps, because you can see the changes without having to do the recompiling, but you don't really want to do that on production sites. So Bootstrap is very good about having some good documentation. And so in their documentation, they've got examples and where you can do the downloads. And that's at twitter.github.com bootstrap. Oh, shoot. So this is what you get when you actually go to that link there. And you see, right here, download Bootstrap. And right up here, it's got getting started, scaffolding. We'll go through that in a few minutes on showing some of that. But this is just where you go if you want to just download. I just want to use it. That's all I want to do. I want to use it and I want to know how to use it. That's where you go. If you want to actually get the source and the less files, because this is just what you use, but if you want the thing that actually helps them create it, you would go to Twitter/Bootstrap. I'm sorry, you would go to github.com/Twitter/Bootstrap, and I'll throw that link up on the screen in just a minute. But this is the actual files in here, and Bootstrap is an open source project, just like Joomla is. So people can report bugs here, they can give code here, they can help test stuff. It's all right there. You can download exactly what they have. Okay, so that was where you get, so the full source, including the less files, here is the link I was telling you about. Okay. So let's just go over now a few of the things, of the specifics of how, what Bootstrap has that's set up. It's got a couple of grid systems. One of the grid systems that it has is static, and it's a 12-column grid system. So if you'll notice in this picture down at the bottom, that's 12. So goes the entire width. One of each of them up at the top has got 12 of them, and then you can divide them out into the different sections if you want here. So a lot of what Bootstrap does is it does everything by classes. So all you have to do is define something as a class, and then it will assign all of these styles to it. And that's how you would do this grid system. You have a container around the top that has .row as one of the classes. That's telling it that it wants to have it as this grid system.
And can you have 2s and 3s?
Yes, you can do the rest of them.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And my little clickery thing has decided it doesn't want to click anymore. I take that back. My little computer has decided it doesn't want to.
It's bad.
I probably hit something funny. Okay, so all you would do is put a span and then whatever the number is. Span 2, you'd put a span 2. You could put a span 2, span 10 if you want to up here. You just have the separate divs. And then you could also do an offset. And so let's say you wanted this, you had these nice little pretty 4s up here, and you wanted the 8 here, but you wanted this one to be blank. You could do one that says, you know, offset 4 and span 8, and it would do an offset of that amount first. So this is what it looks like. You have your wrapper here that has the class row. Then you have, let's say, here's your div with your span 4, and whatever your content in is. Here's my little ellipse here, put it right in there. And then here's your offset 2 and span 6. So if you count those all up, that equals 12, because you've got 4 plus 2 is 6 plus 6 is your 12 right there. So what this will do is, in this one row that you've got here, it'll go for you know, a third of it, and then it'll have a little space, and then it has the second half of it coming. Now, of course, the one we're more interested in is the fluid one. And the way this works is it's got the exact same setup here. The other one, though, it defines those different spans in pixels, whereas this does it in percents. So this will actually become wider and smaller and stuff. So the other one will drop down and can do some stuff like that, because that happens automatically. But this one will actually change the size of the spans depending on what you have. And the way you define it is with the row fluid. The other one we did just row, this one's row dash fluid. And it has the same span X and offset X. So again, you start with your wrapper here, defining it as row fluid. You have your span 4, your offset. So this thing is just exactly the same. The only difference you see is what you define in there. And the way the CSS is done is it uses both the top class plus the inside class to decide how it's being defined. And you can do some nesting as well. So let's say we have this row fluid, and this is what we had before. We want to divide 4 up. So we had our original span 4 like you saw before with the stuff inside, and then we've got our offset 2 span 6. So that's just like what we had in the other screen. And all we do is we define another row inside here and put our stuff in that. Now this could actually be just a straight row, and you could have it static within. If you had something that you wanted to make sure you know, wasn't changing the sizes in proportion to that, you could actually put statics inside of the fluids if you wanted to. So we were listening to Brian talk earlier when he was showing some of his responsive, how some things showed on the phone but did not show when you were in the desktop. And other things would show on the phone, but
Not showing.
not show on the desktop, or forgot which way I said it first, but you know, those different things. And the classes that you use there, I think he started mentioning, it would be the hidden phone if you don't want it to show on the phone, or if you want it to show on the phone, you put that on there. And it also has the hidden tablet and the visible tablet, hidden desktop and the visible desktop. Now, thing to remember with that is what these are going to go and do, you know, display none so that they won't be seen. It still does bring in whatever it is, so as Dawn alluded to earlier, if you've got this great big humonger, you know, 1 meg picture coming in to be shown on your desktop, and all you do is stick a hidden phone on there, you're still bringing the bandwidth of that thing down and hiding it. So you don't want to do that. You do need to look at how you want to handle it. Okay. Now, it also has some text classes that you can use by putting these particular classes onto your text, and they will do something specific. And these are semantic in the sense that it's going to say a certain thing, and right here you'll see what it is actually doing, but you can change in the CSS that you bring over from Bootstrap if you want it to act a little differently. So you can have a class muted, which they've got showing that in a lighter gray text. You've got a warning, which shows in an orange gold text. If you put text dash error, it's going to show in red. Info will be blue. Success is green. That's all. So these are ones that you can put on yours, and then depending on what your template is, you can decide what color you really want these to show at. You know, you may want to still have this as green, but you know that green clashes with everything, so you have a different green you want it to. Or text info, you know, no, that has to be purple. Anytime you're using that, that's going to be your purple text. So you are able to change that kind of thing, which is much easier to do if you have less. Okay. It also has just some useful classes, some utility classes. Pull right is a nice one. This is, we were talking earlier about that image that we showed up there, and Brian put it in there, and he said it was going to pull right. And so it did the nice little float right, which we're all used to, but we know that if you put a float right on there, the text just kind of jams up next to it. But what the pull right is it is a class that contains a float right, but it also contains some padding. So if you put pull right onto an image or to something else, it have this little bit of extra padding, so things aren't going to punch right next to it. And of course, if you've got a pull right, what else do you need? A pull left. Okay. It also has a clear fix, and this is for that problem when you float something to one side, and then you've got the beautiful text that floats around it. But then you have the time when the text is shorter or goes on a much wider screen that you weren't thinking about. And so rather than having the text wrap, it ended before the picture ended. So you've got things below that you didn't want are floating up there. So normally what you would do after that is you'd have to put a div in there with a clear both or something in it. And what the clear fix does is it actually attaches to the wrapper that is around that object instead of having to add it afterwards. So you can attach that to the thing that contains that particular thing, and it will be all encompassed into one. The tricky thing about the clear fix is it depends a little, it uses some modern techniques. So in some cases it doesn't work. The main places we found is when we were including it in things that were actually going on emails. And so the email CSS processing on Outlook is not the best. So we found we had to actually take and put real clears in as well as this. And then another thing that we have, and this is part of the Joomla UI. This is not part of Bootstrap per se, but if you're using the one that we have in Joomla, it's got an element invisible that you can put that class on things, and it will cannot physically see it on the screen, but it still exists. And this is something that you want to use if you've got something that, like assistive technologies and screen readers need to see, but for design reasons, you don't want it to be seen on the screen. So a big one that gets used for is labels on forms, when you might put the little placeholder text inside, or it's obvious from something else what that, what you're supposed to put in there, but a screen reader really still needs to tell the people what it is. You can add a label, put the element invisible on it, and the label will not, you won't see that on the screen, but it will still be there. Okay, now somebody else was asking about this. We do have tables. And again, you really don't want to use the tables for layout design. You really want to hold them to using columnar data. And so if you are doing a table within Bootstrap, you just give it a class table. And then you can start adding additional classes to it to say additional things that you want. Table stripe, that's all you have to do to get a zebra type stripe table. So you just put that on the table element, and then your rows, every other row is going to go and will be striping in different colors. By defining it as a table class, it has also added some nice padding and things in there so that it looks good. Table condense takes a lot of that padding out, still leaves a little bit, but brings it down so that it's a much more compact table. Do you want your borders around? It has some nice borders, not those double ugly things. It's just got some nice borders. Bootstrap, as it comes, the CSS that it uses and when it's defining this, tends to be pretty understated. It uses, like when it has borders, it tends to use them as small, light, so they kind of fade in the background a bit. And you can always make changes on that if your design needs them to be bigger. Okay. It also has table hover. And what the table hover does is if you have if you hover over a particular table row, it'll change the color or do something to that so that you can see where you are. It's just that feedback that it's going to give you. In addition to the table element, there are some classes that you can put on each row element. And these are very much like the text classes that we had that will affect like a background color. You could set up what you exactly want them to do. But again, it would be success, so that let's say this row is on success or approved, and it could be styled a certain way. For decline, there's your error. Warning is going to, it's not showing up here, would be more of an orange or gold probably, and information would be going in on the blue. This is probably, I guess they've got it set up as a white color. Well, no, if I look at it on my screen, that is kind of a light gold. Here, when you look at it, it looks like it's white. So in addition to that, if you were doing, so that's sort of the tables, but this kind of idea that we had on the text as well also covers for buttons. So if you want to create a button, all you have to do is, you can be on the actual button element, or if you want this styling, you can put it on things that are not buttons. And so if you just have a link and you want it to look like a button, you could do this. You just define it with a class of button, and if you want it to look like any of these particular ones, you just add this in addition to that first one, and it will make those particular stylings. And again, as I've said before, for your template, you can decide exactly how you want those to show. They don't have to stay this. It's just that in your HTML, you're using these classes, and then you decide what it is. So here again, here's one of those things that if K2 has a thing that, oh, this was successful, they can put, or this is what you hit if it's successful, for success, like this is save, let's say. They can put that on it, and then it's going to pick up whatever styling that you've decided is for that kind of a thing. So it's really where semantic comes in helpful, rather than them saying, I want this to be a green button. They're saying, I want this to be, this is my success. And then the final one is, I'm not quite sure when you want to do that, but let's say you have a button one that you want to actually look like a link. Size is optional. So in addition to those particular things, you can add another class for button large. So you could have button, button primary, button large on it, and you get the large button. The default one is just, if you don't have any of these, small makes it smaller and mini makes it the smallest one. In addition to that, how many of you, I don't think he did it this way, but how many of you used to keep a backup for those couple of months when you keep a backup where I think Nick got so annoyed that people couldn't find the backup button, that he made a backup button that was that big and nobody could find it because it was so big. Yeah. Well, you also have the ability to do a div size. So you can put button block and it'll be the size of whatever div you have there. You can do what you want. Which doesn't have to be huge. You can do it. But, yeah. So that lets you do a lot of different things. Like you may want to do something that has a picture in it or do something that's the whole button. Okay. So, coming back into, okay, this is just a recap of some of the places where we were getting things. For the downloads, again, you want to go into the twitter.github.com/bootstrap, but then and github.com/twitter/bootstrap is where you get the full source. There's a nice tutorial is here, and then there's a video tutorial right here that you can check out. So before we get into Bootstrap in Joomla itself, what I want to do is flip back to.
Anthony, I got a question.
Yes.
Have you made, hint, a cheat sheet with all of these built-in Bootstrap classes? I'm sure they exist out there. But do you have one that you recommend, or have you ever thought about making one that's Joomla specific? Hint, again.
I haven't at this point done it. I could look at doing something like that. I don't know if anybody else has created them. It's kind of nice because the documentation is really good here, but it is the full documentation, so it's not just here they are.
Here are the classes.
Right.
Here's an example.
Right. Well, actually, let me show you what we've got here. I am just going to sit down for a second because it'll make it a little bit easier since I got the keyboard here.
Isn't there something on Bootstrap, Bootstrap.com, that don't they have a pretty good layout of that?
They might have. You can check that out as well. They've got a tutorial on there too. And
it's the closest
Matt may have something.
Just found one on Google.
Okay.
The first result under Bootstrap cheat sheet.
Okay.
One-page PDF download.
Okay. There you go. Somebody's already done it. Okay. Because what Bootstrap has is they'll come into the getting started. Not really. Come on. Change my resolution. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to go there either. Okay. How did you- We're just going to make this a little smaller. Obviously, the resolution on the projector is a little different than the resolution on my computer at the moment. But, okay, so this is in Bootstrap itself, and it gives you the downloads here. It shows you what the file structure is for Joomla, which I'm going to be going over a little bit too when I show it within, I'm sorry, for Bootstrap, when I show it within Joomla. And it tells you what's included, the different sections that it has here. The scaffolding, this goes over the whole grid system that we just talked about here, including the fluid one, additional layouts for what you would do if you were doing certain layouts with the fixed or the fluid ones. It gives you some examples. And then under the responsive design, it talks about different ways that you can do this and how you would set that up. Now the base CSS is kind of what we were talking about earlier, where you have some of these different ones. If you click on, like under tables, it will give you the information on, and with examples on what each of them do. So it's kind of nice because I talked about it, but you can actually see how it's working down in here. Forms has a whole huge section on what you can do when you're doing forms and how you set those up. I didn't go over all of that in here, but it has setting it up for doing search. So if you want to do a search, you can actually define, it's a form-search, and it's got certain CSS that's set up to make it look like a nice search button. Whether you want, when you do forms, you want them to go in line, like is your label on the same line that your input is, or do you want it on top? How do you want to handle that? And you can use that just by specifying the classes, and it'll do all of that for you. And then it just goes through each of the different types. Like when you want to do checkboxes, you can specify that this is a checkbox type, and it again will handle where all of the things go. So what is happening here, like just an example of how this is nice for Joomla, is that it just so happened in Joomla core for 1.6.2.5, whatever, we never used checkboxes. None of the components within Joomla happen to use checkboxes. And so what started happening was when the components, third-party extensions would start doing things with checkboxes just were sort of being all strange because we weren't really set up to be handling how the checkboxes were going to be looking. And so this is that kind of thing where they would have to then set up how it was going to be done. And here I'm thinking back in the admin template would be where they're not normally thinking of having to style anything. All of a sudden, just ordinary checkboxes weren't working. So here it's the kind of thing that's all included because this is being used by a greater audience than just Joomla, so it tends to include more things than you would just find in ours. Another thing that you can see is if you saw, let's just look right here in the Chrome. Just going to log out here for a second. And you see here you've got the little guys in front and afterwards. Those are appended and prepended icons, which you can do just by prepending and appending inputs that you can just add them right on here. It's just little add-ons to show additional things at the beginning or the ending of stuff. And those are just those, remember I was talking about the little icons that you have available? So it's not like it's downloading whole great big images. It's just a little fun. Yes, Chris?
Those are scalable vector
Yes.
as well.
Yes. So that works nicely with large sizes and small sizes. I've started working in a company where I don't have one, but a lot of the people have got these like 27-inch monitors. So I'm doing the website. It looks great on, my little 15-inch or something, and I make it small, and that works good. And then I find out for them, yeah, but on mine it looks terrible. And I go, yeah, you're 27-inch. So this is the kind of you need to make it. We tend to think, oh, here's your desktop, here's your tablet, here's your little one. But in some cases, you got to start looking at large, or you got to start looking at these TV screens people are putting up at different places. So, you know, responsive really is starting to have to include quite a combined bit of things. So this goes through, we went through the buttons and things. Like you've got all like these icons of different little things that you can do. And I still think nobody's come up with a good save icon. I think everybody still keeps using the
Floppy
diskette.
disk.
The floppy disk, and who uses floppy disk anymore? Now, that's just sort of the base thing. They also have some components that let you do kind of cool things like the drop-down menus by specifying certain things. Then whole navigation and breadcrumbs, pagination. You can set up just the certain class, and it does that for you. We always sort of had that in Joomla already. Badges and labels. So just like what we did for those same, you know, success, warning, danger, they'll let you put little label badge kind of things with specifying, depending on what the class is what it's going to actually look like. So in this case, it's label warning, gives you something looking like this. Or you have badges where you're just saying, you know, 17 hits or something like this. You would be able to use something and it just comes out if you want to call out a little piece of information. Those are used for that. The typography, let's see. Actually, this is not coming to that particular site. Ooh, the thumbnails. So you can do, it has it set up for doing some certain things with thumbnails and different sizes. Here, let me just bring up the, okay, so here's the markup for it. You have a UL in there, have your list, you define it as, here's thumbnails, here are the spans I want to do for the different things, and it'll set the whole thing up for doing what you need it to do. It has progress bars, so you can just specify, it does all the JavaScript that you need. So a lot of this is activating JavaScript just by giving it a class. So that's where it can make it really easy to do some of this stuff. It has different media objects, how you can set up what you want it to be, with setting it up and doing nesting. But you can go through here and see some of the additional, oh, the well is kind of interesting. You know how sometimes you have something that you just want to call out. And what the well does is it basically creates something like this. It's got a separate background, a border within something. And all you have to do is specify that that's a well. And it will do that styling for you.
I kept calling it well deep.
Well deep.
Disappointing.
Well, yeah.
And is this all controlled by the one bootstrap.min.css file and then the jQuery? So it's not like it's calling on a reservoir of information on this site and you're dependent on that to get it attached to some containers.
Yeah, and you decide how many actual CSS, but with that thing I showed you with the, at its simplest, the bootstrap.min, those three, you know, bootstrap.min.css plus jQuery plus the bootstrap.min.js does all of this that I'm showing you here. We have some additional things that we've added in Joomla that you would then need to make sure that that stuff is in.
So then at this point, when you update Joomla, you're going to get the newest jQuery, so you don't need to be loading jQuery anywhere else.
Right, well, yeah, I'll go over how you use it in Joomla. Okay, because doing it just as Bootstrap itself is slightly different than using it in Joomla. Because we've added a few things. But, okay, and then it does show you the JavaScript and how you do certain things. It's got different transitions, etc. But you can go over this if you're interested in it, or if you're going to be actually using it. This will show you the different ways that you do it. But it's great because, you know, the documentation is all right here. And it has examples in there that you can copy as well if you download the full stuff. And I'm going to come back and show you that in a minute. Okay. So we're going to jump back to our slideshow here. And we're going to go to our third little section, which is actually Bootstrap in Joomla. And there are 3 ways that you can use Bootstrap in Joomla. And part of it depends on what version of Joomla you're using. One is you can use the Bootstrap files in Joomla itself. That only works if you're in 3 point something, because we don't have the Bootstrap files in 2.5. So, so you'd need to add the Bootstrap files yourself. The second way that you can do it is you can download a customized Bootstrap files. And I'll show you how that works when we go over each of these sections. And the third way is you can create your own template.css file from the information that Joomla has in its Bootstrap files, in its Bootstrap less files. And that way, the third one, I'm going to show you during the less talk this afternoon. I'm not really going to go over it in this talk. So we're just going to go over the first 2. So using the Bootstrap files in Joomla. What it looks like is if you go to Joomla, and again I'm talking 3 at this point. If you go to Joomla right now in 3, you'll see that it has got it's got folders called Media, and under that it's got one JUI for Joomla user experience or user interactions. And within that it's got CSS, fonts, images, JS for JavaScript, and less. And you'll see that this is pretty much what we have, what Bootstrap has, because it's all CSS classes, fonts, and JS, and the less files. So if we're in the Media JUI CSS of there, what we have in there is we've got bootstrap.css and we've got bootstrap.min.css. These 2 files are identical, at least they should be. The only difference is that the min doesn't have any of the comments, it doesn't have any spaces. It looks like one great big long line of just characters. So normally what you'd use is you'd want to use the min one because that'll load faster. But if you don't know what's going on, you probably want to look at the other one so you can find things. It also has bootstrap-responsive.css and the min version. The way that Joomla is set up is it's got some of the responsive classes are in a different CSS file, so you do need to load both of them to get all of that. There are ways that you can actually do it so you have them all in one.
Question?
Yes?
Does Joomla look for the min first, and if it's not there, then it's...
No, you have to specify this in your,
Okay.
when you're loading it. And I'll go over how you specify which one. Because right now, these just sit in this folder, and they don't do anything, okay? You have to actually be using them. It also has the bootstrap-extended.css, and this is where all of the Joomla-specific information is. This you don't get if you were to download the specific things that are in, I mean, if you were to download the vanilla Bootstrap, you would not get, this stuff, this does not come. You'd want to add this to it. It also has a right to left file. I don't know if any of you in here are careful about doing right to left, or all of you know that everybody who's coming to your site is strictly going left to right. But if you might have anybody who's doing right to left and want to continue what Joomla has in terms of being able to do things right to left, then you want to make sure that you include that one as well. Okay. So also what it's got is it's got these files, and these are all ones that are specific to Joomla. The chosen sprite and chosen are, if you've been in like the Joomla backend where you're picking the positions for, and again I'm talking 3, picking the positions in the module, and you start typing something and it brings the drop down that shows your choices in there, that is chosen. That's not specifically Bootstrap, I don't believe. I think that's a JUI thing that got added. And it's a jQuery. So you'd need to include that if that was something that you wanted to use. IcoMoon is are the images, some of those little font icon things, and the table, the sort table list, different ways that you deal with doing the sorting for the tables in Joomla. Okay, so getting on to how you would actually use these then. What you need to do is you need to add all this specific Bootstrap stuff to your template. And you can actually do that pretty easily. If you add this to your index.php file in the header, php jhtml : _ blah blah, Bootstrap load CSS, it will take and load all of those CSS files from the media and add it to it. So what you would have gotten there is you would have all the basics, and then you could add underneath it like a template CSS that would have your specific things. But you'd be doing it starting with a base of what the standard CSS is. So that's one way that you can do it. Okay, so this, sorry, I'm just getting a little confused. Oh, okay, so that's one way that you can load it automatically. All right, so I tabbed it out. I went to some. So we've added this particular one. Now, if you want to add it with the right to left files, this is what you want to do to get it. You need to do this particular. You get the document that you have, then you find out what the direction is, and then what you would do is you would come into here, do that same JHTML that you have in here, but you would do true to say, yes, I really do want to load these CSS files, plus load the direction ones, okay? So doing it with nothing just loads the main CSS files. Adding in true plus the direction adds the main CSS files plus the right to left. And if you only want the right to left, oh boy, this is really cute. Okay, sorry. So, it's doing something funny here. Okay. Okay, there. Okay. Okay, this is if you only want to show the right to left, because let's say you've already loaded the CSS files and everything you want, but you just need to add this. Then you'd do the same thing, but you'd put false here, and it's not going to load CSS. Because this load CSS grabs everything from the media file. And you may have had, what I'm going to show you briefly coming up, is that you've already added your stuff. And then after you've loaded the CSS, you need to make sure that you load the JavaScript. You just do that by doing, again, a JHTML and Bootstrap.framework.
Is that going to know automatically put the jQuery before this?
It does, yeah. It's all those. Okay, so the second way that you can do it, and this is where you can download the customized Joomla files and use those. And that is here under Customize. You can choose what components you want to do. I would actually grab them all because some third-party extension might be pulling something in. You can decide what you want to do or how you want to do that. Which jQuery plugins you want to have. And then you can customize the variables. You know, what do you want to have as your font family? What's your success text color? So you can fill all of this in, and then at the bottom, it will customize it and then download it. So you could then use these files instead of the ones that are in the media. and it will have to change some of the things. Now, you'd want to make sure that you also loaded that, the Bootstrap extended, and add that, yeah, because that, or look to take the stuff that's in there, because that's some Joomla specific things. And I'm sure that Matt probably has some other ways that you can do this as well, but this gives you a way to get a quick start on it to get a lot of your CSS. Ultimately, what's really nice, if you go in and you look at Protostar and it's using less to do it, it brings it all in. It just pulls what it wants from the different places as imports, and then uses less to pre-process it to come up with a single template.css file that has everything in it, so you're only bringing down one file each time instead of 4 or 5 different files. So that's something I'm going to go over in my talk this afternoon. Okay, so that was, if you're doing that, what you want to make sure is, you know, be safe. There are different versions of Bootstrap, so make sure that you're picking one that matches what is actually in Joomla right now if you want to match with the other stuff, particularly if you're pulling pieces from it. The rest. And then again, I was saying that third one is what I'm going to be going over in my talk this afternoon. So any quick questions? We've got 1 minute to do questions plus hand out the book.
Quick question.
Yes.
Is there a way to go, the less will go from Bootstrap code to the tighter less code? Is there a way to go backwards? If you get a template with...
If you've got a template with CSS, you can't go backwards.
Can't go
No, because it just takes it. Now, less is basically a superset of CSS. So you could have a less file that looks exactly like CSS.
Is it readable? Is it?
Oh yeah, it's very close to CSS. In fact, you could take a CSS file, call it the extension LESS, and it's a valid less file.